Hello Internet, my name is Ayla Tesler-Mave, and today we're going to cruise down memory lane, most likely a freeway somewhere with the top down in your sports car, and explore arguably some of the most iconic dad rock riffs of the 70s. Now of course, I'm sure many dads did not rock out to this music, and conversely, not everyone who loves this kind of music is a dad. And yet, somehow, I think that dad rock is the perfect term to describe the riffs that I'll be showing you in this video. So, let's begin. Whoa, hold your horses, Ayla, from the past. For all the dads and fathers and all people watching this video, if you are a Guitareo member, remember that you can dive into these riffs using our interactive practice tool that allows you to slow every section down, loop the treble sections, all while seeing the full tab along with music. It really is the best way to learn these. And if you're not a member, you can get a free trial at guitareo.com/trial. So let's get back to the video. So our first dad rock riff is that of the iconic All Right Now, written by the English rock band Free. This is one of my personal favorite classic rock songs, so I had to start the list here. So for starters, there are actually two guitar parts in this song, one panned all the way to the left, one to the right, and they actually use different rhythms and different voicings throughout. So obviously both versions of the riff are great, but I'm gonna be showing you the one that has slightly higher voicings. Maybe it's a little bit more recognizable because it might stand out a little more in the mix, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, this is how we start. This very cool A major chord where, I'm barring with my first finger across the second fret of the D string, the G string, and then I'm actually barring with my pinky across the 5th fret of the B string and high E string. So it is a little bit of a stretch. But then you end up with this super full sounding A major chord where we end up with, some fullness and richness that leads us into the next chord movement where I'm still barring with that first finger. This time I'm putting my ring finger on the 4th fret of the D string. And I'm really focusing on hitting the low A, D, G, though you can definitely get the B string in there as well, because I do think I hear that note. And then you immediately follow that by putting your middle finger on that 3rd fret of the B string. And then back to that big A chord. Now this is the most fun part. We end up with these lovely voicings, where I'm starting by playing open A, ring finger on the 4th fret of the D string, open G string, middle finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, and you can leave the high E string open. Now, without moving these two fingers, I am adding my first finger back to the 2nd fret, barring, because basically what we want to do is make sure that the G string and the high E string are no longer open. And then back to that big A chord. So now we have now the very, very first time we hear the riff in the song, it's actually that exact rhythm where the chords are just held like this. There's nothing too funky with the strumming hand. But as the song goes on, the strumming becomes more and more free, pardon the pun. And there's a lot of variants, but I think the most famous strumming pattern sounds like this. So it's just at that end part So I'm starting by playing the open A string, and then down, up, down, down, up, down, up. Sometimes it's hard to slow down the strumming a little bit, but yeah, basically. And then you come back to that big A chord where you can separate by playing the root on its own at first, and then strumming the whole chord. Here's the riff. Our next 70s riff is Life in the Fast Lane from the hugely popular Americana band, the Eagles. We're gonna start with a hammer-on from the 5th fret to the 7th fret on the A string. And then you're immediately going to drop that ring finger down to play the 7th fret of the D string. And then you're gonna come back over with that middle finger and play the 7th fret of the A string. This is a super important move to get down because you're gonna be using it throughout the whole riff. It's kind of like a rolling motion. And then you end up playing the 5th fret of the D string. And if you really want to get authentic about it, you want to pull down a little bit to get a bit of twang. And then you play 7th fret to the 5th fret on the A string. And then you slide down to the 5th fret on the E string. And you're sort of sliding from around the 7th fret. Doesn't have to be super particular because it's such a quick movement, but that's essentially what it is. And then you play the 3rd fret of the E string to the open E string. And again, if you want to be authentic, you want to pull down on that 3rd fret of the low E string. And then when the riff repeats, it's essentially the same thing, except it ends one note shorter than before. So it ends on that 3rd fret where you're, pulling down for twang. So far, slowly, what we have is this. And then, the timing's super cool. It's kind of like you're falling down the stairs and landing on your feet. I've used that example before, but that's just the imagery I like for riffs like this that kind of tumble over the bar line. And so yeah, it's the same as the first time basically, except as soon as you play the open E string, you come right back up. And you play the riff again, this time again omitting the low E string. Let me just play it again slowly, because usually it's easier to learn this kind of stuff by ear, if you're not already sure what's going on. So here's what we have so far. And now the riff repeats. But there's a little extra something added there to lead into the next part of the song. So right after you play that 3rd fret of the low E string, you walk up, 5th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret. It's all super staccato and kind of funky. Palm muted, and definitely pick close to the bridge to get even more twang. Even if you're not using a guitar like a Strat, that's usually a great approach if you want to bring twang out of any guitar you're using. Just pick as close as you can to the bridge. Now putting that whole thing together slowly And then quickly, this is what we have. Our next dad rock riff is China Grove by American rock band the Doobie Brothers. So a lot of the magic in the intro does come from the delay effect that is added to the signal chain, but the delay cuts out for most of the song anyways, and the riff is played the same regardless. So let's get into it. So the first thing we're gonna do is play a power chord up here on the 7th fret of the A string. This is an E power chord. And you're playing it twice and sliding off when you play it. And something that I found really helpful is if I let my index finger lightly touch the low E string, I end up muting it so that I can really dig in when I strum. And I don't have to watch what I'm doing as much. I can kind of just throw my hand down. And I'll only end up with the notes that I mean to have ring out in the chord. But yeah, once you do that, there's a lot going on with the strumming. And I'm actually gonna turn off the delay for a second, just so we can focus on that. There's a bit of a back and forth between strumming pretty much all of the strings, but focusing more on like the mid strings here. You don't have to be too particular, but you play middle strings, low E string, middle strings, low E string. And of course, you want to be muting with your strumming hand, because otherwise you'll end up with... Obviously, that's not the sound we're going for. And when you watch this song live, you'll notice that Tom is actually sliding his hand quite a bit up and down the fretboard. You don't necessarily have to do that, but of course, that might help bring a little more authenticity to it. And you do that twice in a row. And now we have... I'll show you the power chords first, and then I'll of course show you what to do with your strumming hand. But you play 5th fret on the A string. That's a D power chord. D flat power chord here at the 4th fret. And then an A power chord. Of course, if you really want it, you could play it with these 2 fingers, just so you keep your shape the same all the way down, but personally, I land with my index finger here. And then back up to that 7th fret here. Now let's look at what you're doing with your strumming hand. So, kind of the same movement as before. That sort of thing. You have to keep your hands super relaxed. A lot of downstrokes here. I do see people playing this riff, you know, with a down-up movement, but again, this is really focused on downstrokes. And again, you do want to be palm muting that low E string, but it does ring through a little bit more here at this part of the riff. So you can ease up on your palm muting just a little bit at this point. And then there's a little walk up before the riff repeats, where you play 7th fret on the low E string, 9th fret, and then the open E string. Now when you put all of it together slowly, this is what we have. Now full speed. Now adding delay. There's China Grove. So next up is the riff from Jet Airliner by Steve Miller Band, because I just don't think any dad rock list would be complete without at least one entry from Steve Miller Band. So I'll teach you how to play the riff in both octaves, because of course when you listen to the original track, you do hear a riff played in 2 octaves. And I'll also teach you a little addition you can make to this riff if you're playing it on your own, just so it sounds a little bit more complete. Because the part on its own sounds great, but it's missing a little something without the rest of the band. But yeah, this is how you play it. You start by playing the 5th fret of the G string to the 3rd fret, back to the 5th fret. You can add a little subtle vibrato there. Back to the 3rd fret. Now we have this trill on the D string where you're playing the 3rd fret, hammer onto the 5th fret, pull off again, and then you slide down to that 1st fret. You could bend up the note a little bit. And then, if you want this to sound a little bit more complete and full, if you're playing the riff on your own, you could play the root note here on the 3rd fret of the A string. Or without it. Either way, that's the riff. Now if we want to play it up the octave, of course there's so many different places on the neck you could play this riff, but watching live versions, it seems like it's played here on the 8th fret of the high E string, to the 6th fret, back to the 6th fret, and then a trill on the B string, playing 6th fret, hammer onto the 8th fret, pull off, and then slide down to that 4th fret of the B string with a little bit of a bend. And similarly to what I taught you with the lower octave, you could add the root note here on the 5th fret of the G string, if you so please. But again, you don't have to. So now, I'll play both parts slowly, then I'll play them quickly, and hopefully you'll be able to play the riff. And there's Jet Airliner. So the next riff is Highway to Hell by Australian rock group AC/DC, who I don't think really need any introduction because they have written so many of the most iconic riffs of the 70s by far. And fun fact, you'll actually have a really hard time playing this riff whether you're tuned to standard tuning or E flat, because the whole track is about 35 to 40 cents flat. You kind of are sitting in between 2 tunings. And I'll show you what that sounds like in a second because I actually have detune pitch setup going on in my rig. But I'll teach it to you, of course, in standard tuning so you can play along. Here we go. So the first thing you want to do is play a very cool A power chord. Open D string, the 2nd fret of the D string, 2nd fret of the G string. and you play it 3 times. Now, of course, usually an A major chord includes the B string, 2nd fret. It would not be the end of the world if you included that, but I think it sounds a little more authentic if it's just that power chord. Now the next chord movement is pretty cool. So with this chord shape, what you want to do is put your pinky on the 3rd fret of the B string, middle finger on the 2nd fret of the G string, and then your index finger, your 1st finger, on the 2nd fret of the low E string. And what makes this chord a little tough is you want to be muting the A string. So I'm actually letting that index finger rest gently across it so it doesn't ring out. But you do want to include the open D string in the chord. So what you want to do is start by strumming the D string, G string, and B string. Then you come down and you play the E string and the D string. And then you're going to reach over with that 3rd finger and play the 3rd fret of the low E string. And then you do it again. Of course, there's a little variation going on there. Instead of over-explaining it, I'll just play it again for you so you can get it in your head, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm doing. And then after you've done that movement 3 times, you end up playing the chord one last time, removing your 3rd finger, really focusing on the lower strings when you play it, but it's okay to get the whole chord in there. So again, this is what we have so far, slowly, from the top. And then you come back to that A power chord. So let me play the whole thing slowly for you 2 more times, just because I think that's a really great way to internalize what I'm doing rhythmically. So here we go. And that's the riff. And before we move on, I promised I'd show you something kind of crazy with the tuning of the song. So the song, in actuality, is a little bit more like this. So if I switch back and forth between standard tuning you might be able to hear a very slight variation. If I were to play along to the original track, that 2nd tuning would sit a little bit more nicely and not sound kind of dissonant and crazy. But yeah, it was kind of cool to notice that when I was learning the song. It's important to know this so you don't freak out when you play along to the original recording and find that it sounds crazy. It's not your fault. It's just the way it was recorded. So the final riff on this list is from the ZZ Top classic Grange, released in 1973. So what makes this riff quite challenging is actually what you're doing with your strumming hand, because the song starts with an A power chord, but instead of strumming it, what you're doing is you're actually using your pick to play the low A string, and then you're using your middle finger to play the D string, and you're using your 3rd finger to play the G string. And it's super muted. So as soon as I play the chord, I'm immediately releasing pressure. So it's staccato, super short. You could also use your strumming hand to try and mute things as well. Sometimes it's a group effort of any available hands you have muting the strings. And yeah, the first time you play this riff, it starts with a pickup. And we end up with that rhythm, obviously landing on the offbeat most of the time. So it might really help to use your feet to play 1, 2, 3, 4, because what you're doing is playing on the offbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which is kind of challenging but very fun to work on. And then things get very twangy. And you start by playing the A string, and then you put your pinky on the 5th fret of the D string, and you end up playing the D string and the G string together, back to the A string, picked of course, and then you end up putting your pinky on the 5th fret of the G string. The first time you play it, you go back and forth again between the open A, and then you end up playing something twangy up here, obviously playing that G string, and also trying to catch the D string in there too, which of course is still covered by that first finger from the A power chord. Again, maybe I didn't highlight this well enough, but you're kind of planting your index finger here the whole time. And then you end up kind of dragging the 5th fret of the G string down when you play, especially the second time, because you'll notice I'm playing that movement with my pinky on the 5th fret of the G string 2 times. And yeah, it's just about going back and forth between your pick, actually picking the A string, and then your available fingers. And then when we put it all together slowly, this is what we have so far. And you'll notice that when the riff repeats, it doesn't have that extra pickup that you have the very first time you play it at the beginning of the song. And if you don't know what I mean, again, just listen to what I'm playing. Just really, internalize what I'm doing, because sometimes that's the easiest way to learn. And once you get that down, this twangy riff happens 3 times until a simpler variation comes in that sounds like this. So you'll notice there's a walk-up happening here on the 3rd fret of the A string to the 5th fret. And if you want to make it super simple, you can play but then, of course, what makes it authentic is adding those little extra ghost notes. So there's kind of like an open between the 3rd fret and the 5th fret. And I think it's totally okay to pick that part if you want. But then, as the song goes on, they kick on the overdrive, and you can pick the whole thing. And you'll notice up, 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 up. And that's ZZ Top. Again, this riff took me personally a long time to get down. Be patient with yourself. The whole hybrid picking thing is very challenging, but this might be a great riff to help introduce you to the concept, and it could even be your practice to get this technique down. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson as much as I had fun making it. Please feel free to comment below and let me know what your favorite dad rock songs and riffs of the 70s are, because honestly, I'd love to know. So I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.